All right, let's wait till people join now.
Sounds good.
There we go. All right, I think people are starting to join right now. So welcome to everyone that's joining the webinar. We're going to kick it off in another couple minutes. While we're waiting, we do have what we're going to be talking about today is going to be reputation management that moves the needle. So I see people are joining right now. Excited to see all of you. Welcome. We do have a quick poll that we're going to launch. Maybe we'll give it another minute or two until more people start joining. But we have a poll that we're going to launch, which has to do with the state of the economy a little bit. And we'll sort of get a little bit of a sense from other people on, how they're dealing with some of the challenges that are coming up right now. So welcome to everyone that's joining. We're going to kick this off in just another minute or two. And we will get started. All right, for everyone that's joining right now, welcome to the webinar, Reputation Management That Moves the Needle. Really excited to have you here. We're gonna get started in a bit, but in the meantime, while we're waiting, I just wanna launch a quick poll. And I wanna ask, has the economic uncertainty led you to prioritize owned and earned media over paid channels? So if you're joining, we just launched a quick poll. Apparently hosts and panelists can't vote, so I can't vote on it.
I saw that too.
All right. And for everyone new that's just joined, we're going to kick off soon talking about reputation management that moves the needle. And we just launched a quick poll, how economic uncertainty has led you to prioritize owned and has economic uncertainty led you to prioritize owned and earned media over paid channels? So if you want to quickly cast your vote, we'll share those results as soon as we're done with the poll, and we will then kick it off. And give everyone another minute. I don't know, and also if anyone wants to quickly comment also, we oftentimes like to ask where everyone is in the world. I know there's like blistering heats all throughout the country and in the world right now. So maybe just leave in the comments if you want to write to us and tell us where you are. We'd love to hear it and, know where everyone's calling in from. Jenny, I don't know if you know this. I'm originally from, I think we talked about this, but I'm originally from Chicago. I moved out to Israel about 9 years ago. It's quite hot here right now also, but it's in the summer, so that's normal.
Yeah, our G2 headquarters are Chicago, so
represent.
Yep.
Chicago represent. Chat is disabled. Oh, that's not good. That is not good at all. So let's see if I hope we can fix that. And if we can't, I apologize. We can talk in the Q&A and you guys can just leave your comments there and we'll make sure that we get them. That is not great. So we will then figure out how to solve that if possible. And if not, I apologize and hope you guys still interact with us on the Q&A section. Chicago hot and breezy. All right. All right. I think we can stop the poll. Let's share the results and kind of see where things netted out. So it looks like interesting. Nobody's using paid channels more, but there are but the majority of the respondents had said, oh no, that's not true. The majority of the respondents are saying that they use earned channels more, which is good. That's what I was hoping was going to happen. Because we are seeing the same. We're seeing a similar shift. The industry is seeing that shift right now. But still, people are still using the 3 equally, which is also very interesting. Cool. I think we can kick it off. So let's maybe start with the webinar right now. So welcome to everyone who's joined Reputation Management That Moves the Needle. We're going to be talking about, so again, obviously we're going to be talking about reputation management, and I'm sure everyone is continuing to see different news updates about recessionary predictions and budget cuts, especially for marketing and communications departments. And as we saw in the poll, even that more people are actually shifting their strategy over to owned and earned media. So it's especially important to think about how our work as communicators factors into the overall customer journey and helps move it along. So I'm really excited to be here with Jenny Gardynski from G2. So for those of you that don't know, my name is Aaron Friedman. I'm the VP of Marketing of Propel. I actually have years of reputation management experience, so this is why I'm actually really excited about this webinar in particular. And of course, Jenny, who in her current role is focused on driving brand awareness for G2 as the world's largest and most trusted software marketplace. And prior to G2, she spent over a decade at Pan Communications, where she most recently served as the vice president in the PR agency's technology practice, representing a wide range of software brands. So Jenny, welcome. Really excited to have you here. I think this is going to be a really, really exciting conversation. Just a little bit of housekeeping. First thing that we're going to go through is I'm just going to do a quick introduction and background of Propel. What we're going to talk about is the role of consistency in marketing programs, keeping up with the conversation and ways that brands need to start thinking about this, and the power of word of mouth marketing and customer reviews. And then, of course, at the end, we're going to leave time for Q&A and answer all of your questions. Again, I think that the chat may be still disabled, so I'm really sorry about that. But if you can definitely have conversations and leave anything you have to say in the Q&A, which is enabled, and we'll make sure that we get to that there. So flood it, make sure that it's all there. And also really exciting is that we've started something new. We're starting to actually live tweet, bits and pieces that come out of the webinar. So hashtag Propel Live, if you have something that you heard from this that was really interesting or you want to communicate with us about as well, we're going to be there. We'll answer your questions. We'll be interacting there as well. So that is also an option if the chat still doesn't work. So, okay, a little bit about Propel. Propel was founded in 2019 on a mission to democratize and make PR technology accessible for the masses. Propel is reimagining earned media and has launched many first-of-a-kind features, including the industry's only native Gmail and Outlook email pitch plugins. Our platform helps marketers and communication professionals connect with journalists and influencers, earned media coverage, and measure impact. We're headquartered in Tel Aviv with teams based across the globe in New York, London, Miami. And we have over 150 customers, including Microsoft, US Air Force, Real Chemistry, and other leading brands and agencies. So what I want to start off and kick the webinar off with is by talking a little bit about why consistency is key when it comes to reputation management in general. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about why it's so important for moving prospects along the customer journey today. And as it relates to budget cuts specifically, marketing teams are making significant cuts. And when we're worried about retaining and finding new business, I want to talk about this a little bit more and see how marketers we can address this. So this is a research study that was done from Sapio, who researched 500, they surveyed 500 different business decision makers. And what they found was that the biggest bucket for cuts was, in fact, sales and marketing and comms teams, which is concerning for a lot of reasons. I think as marketers, we can all feel that. There's decreasing investment in marketing and communication, decreasing investment in marketing communications. It comes with different risks. It makes it more challenging for brands to establish trust. It takes a toll on the early phases of the journey, building awareness, which harms new business initiatives. And there's obviously the potential of neglecting those that are in the pipeline, especially concerning when businesses need to be protecting their revenue and staying cash positive. So Jenny, how do you think this is going to impact the customer journey? Should businesses reconsider this shift in cutting budgets around marketing and sales?
Yeah, I know. I think we've seen this before. I think most recently, during the pandemic with that temporary time where we saw a lot of organizations either were pausing, PR budgets or tightening the purse strings there. And I think they saw the negative impact. And I think that's why it's so important to have measurable results and metrics to show that impact that PR will have, because of course, brand awareness might have softer metrics, but it fuels that funnel. And if budgets are being paused or reduced, then that negative impact will be seen in terms of whether that's a drop in competitive share of voice or traffic back to the website. So just drawing that correlation and knowing that if you're willing to take a hit to if you're not willing to take a hit to your metrics, then that's something to definitely think about.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because companies, obviously, especially in this kind of economic climate, they do need to make cuts. They need to cut budgets in some areas, but they also can't starve themselves. They have to make sure that people are still hearing about them. They're still staying, top of mind, and that, they're available when their customers need them.
Yeah. So I think it's definitely, I think we should always be doubling down on what works, but it might be a time to do a little bit less experimenting and focusing on those efforts that we know are most likely to drive that impact and having a laser focus on that.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, because, a lot of marketing teams that have sort of been around already and have, been able to experiment with these things. They know what works, what doesn't work. They know, what experiments they kind of had on their plate, but they also can go back to the basics and know this is what works. This is definitely going to work for me. And if I just double down on this right now, we should be fine.
For sure.
Okay, cool. So, again, I think that, prioritizing constant communication, especially during difficult times of crisis and uncertainty is really important. People want to hear from the businesses that they care about, whether it's, very early awareness stages or long-term relationships. And doing this is going to ultimately help build trust. And, today, trust is a huge factor in the customer experience. There was an Adobe research. These numbers here are based on an Adobe research that found that 7 in 10 customers buy more from brands that they trust, and they simply abandon brands that they don't trust. And some of the most common ways that customers show their trust is by making even more purchases and sharing positive experiences on review sites and social media. Two examples you can see are at the top of Chewy and Dr. Pepper, kind of polarizing, examples right now. I love this Chewy example. I don't know if you heard about this, but there was someone tweeted that their pet they ordered a bag of food and their pet had passed away, so they called Chewy, and Chewy was like, keep the bag, we'll give you your money back, donate to a shelter. And like they sent them flowers or a portrait of their pet, and that was great, and that's really great. That's amazing customer experience. But the craziest part about it was that the internet sort of got up and was like, yeah, we experienced the same thing. And it's not just something that they did one time. This is a core part of what they do and how they treat people. And then the polarizing side of that is the Dr. Pepper story, where, I don't know if they've responded recently, but there was a whole controversy right now about a lawmaker who was drinking Dr. Pepper in one of their announcements. And you're just like, they were silent. They just completely ignored what their audience had to say. So I just found that, really interesting. I mean, did you see either of those examples?
Definitely have seen the Chewy one. And I think that's, Chewy can say they're doing that all day long, and that's great. But when the customers share it themselves, it carries that much more weight, and it's that much more authentic. So I love to see that.
I love that. I thought it was so amazing. And then I also just want to, before I pass it over to you for a second, I just want to point out that, putting yourself out there in general can be very vulnerable and sometimes a touchy process when it comes to handling bad press or bad public reviews. I mean, God, I worked in, reputation management for so long, and this was like, we couldn't say anything really. We're just constrained by everything. So Jenny, what do you think? What can a brand do to navigate this negative public sentiment, whether that's, a critical press headline or negative review?
Yeah, I think it's funny because people who aren't in our industry will often say, all press is good press. And we know that is not true.
Yes.
As we're here talking about reputation management, and, any public negative sentiment, of course, has the potential to negatively impact your brand. But I think it's how you respond to that and address it can be equally, if not, as important in terms of not just maintaining trust, but rebuilding that trust that may have been lost. So I think, when this happens, because it will, hopefully far and few in between, but when these instances come up, I think there's a few things to be thinking about. I think first and foremost is, where is this coming from? Like you said, it could be a lot of different channels. It could be a social media comment, a blog comment, a negative customer review, a reporter having a negative headline. It's, what is the validity of that source? And I will say, luckily on G2, all of our reviews are verified for real users, but just thinking about, is there a disgruntled employee or someone that's biased or has a reason to say something negative? That doesn't mean you don't respond. It just means, thinking about if they carry that influence and weight where it's going to damage your brand, then you still will want to address it. But beyond, I think, the validity of the source is the validity of the claim and the criticism that's being placed on the brand. So if it's something that is not factual and it's false, lead with your proof points and be as specific as possible, because we see a lot of brand messaging out there around, the world's, leading greatest provider of, something. And that type of messaging is just very marketing speak. So of course you want to be kind and not, defensive, but leading with the proof points and being as specific as possible is important. And then I think the last scenario really is if this is negative sentiment online, and it is true, I think about all of the what we see in our consumer lives when it's either a consumer facing brand, a celebrity, a lot of those non-apology apologies that are a lot of talk but no action. Yeah. So as comms and PR pros, we aren't always the ones that are coming up with that solution, but we need to work with those stakeholders internally and then to figure out the action plan and communicate it effectively. So I think that way to rebuild trust is demonstrating it with an action plan. Yeah. I think actually just one last thing is that anytime there's negative sentiment online, is how can that be a lesson to inform your messaging going forward? So is there something that maybe you're kind of leaning into that you shouldn't be? Is there something that can be optimized in your messaging that you want to highlight as a strength and differentiator going forward? So obviously every single situation is nuanced, but there's a lot to be thinking about to help maintain and rebuild that trust.
No, absolutely. And I love that you kind of mentioned that, these things can kind of come out of nowhere. Like it could just be a disgruntled person that just tweets about something or whatever. When I was working, a little bit, more involved in reputation management, this was during the Trump era. And what was really fascinating about it was that not a political conversation, but whenever Trump mentioned a brand by name, that company was immediately catapulted into the spotlight. And they had to make some very serious decisions, like, what do we do? Because you can't stay silent anymore. You now have to take a stance one way or another. So how do you pad that messaging or figure out what the right thing to say is? And I think it's kind of what you were saying is figure out if this is a real problem, if this is something that's really an issue and it's an issue with your brand, you may need to go back to the drawing board and fix it. And sort of be honest with yourself a little bit.
Yeah, I think, and also knowing your brand values and key messages, because that will guide your communications and your decisions if that's already been established. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, and actually it segues into the next piece of this, which is going to be, constantly listening to the conversation of your stakeholders is obviously a major first step in strong and constant communication. And we want to talk about ways that you can do that without being overwhelmed, because it can be a really daunting process to monitor and figure out what people are actually talking about. So, between social media, digital news, everything in between, it can get pretty overwhelming to just sift through such a high volume of content every day. So, this is where, different tools obviously come into play that can make it easier for you to organize and keep up with all the different kinds of conversation that are important to your audience or to your clients' audiences. And this can mean things like sentiment tracking, knowing about the good and the bad immediately. It can mean, requests or unmet needs, the example that we see here on screen is that people need Bridgerton. I personally don't watch Bridgerton, but now I'm thinking maybe I should watch Bridgerton. People have opinions about your brand. It can go on and on. And monitoring the digital landscape is a key part of reputation management, as many comms pros already know. But do you think that it's being used strategically enough? And what should PR pros start thinking about differently? Like, how should they be addressing this this kind of topic?
Yeah, I think as communications and PR pros, it's our job to have a pulse on our brand. And it's hard, like you said, to keep track of that because there's all these different channels that are proliferating, from the traditional media, social media, blogs, but then there's a lot of new emerging channels too, where you just need to know kind of where you're being mentioned, but also what's the sentiment, because how else can you drive not just brand awareness, but sentiment, message pull through on the terms and topics you want to be known for. So I think there's, a few things there to keep in mind is, one is getting visibility and having that view of all of these mentions, but then also thinking about where can you control or influence that messaging. So yes, your own channels you can control, we can update our website, our social media channels. Then we think about, third-party outlets like, reporter written coverage. We cannot control that for sure, but we can influence that by, consistently using our messaging and having a messaging guide that we're enforcing as much as possible. Reporters, as we know, aren't always willing to make updates unless it's, factual. So that's always something to keep in mind. But there's also those kind of in the middle channels. So I think G2 would be one of those where there's, we're a marketplace. And even if you're not a paid customer, there's, you can claim your profile. And I think we see this with other sites like thinking about, Glassdoor comparably. That's another channel that you're popping up on, updating your logo, your URL, making sure that everything is up to date. Consistency matters because I think, from a personal standpoint, G2, we were formerly known as G2 Crowd. So I sometimes see that cropping up where I'm looking to correct that because we need to direct people to the right place, make sure they understand who we are, what we do. But think about, a lot of times organizations are evolving their offering. So for example, if you're being referred to in the media or on a marketplace as, only catering to SMBs, but you've actually evolved and now you have enterprise customers, you could be missing out on prospects. So consistency is key. And that starts with, having an up-to-date messaging guide. I think messaging certainly evolves, but having that as a single source of truth for not just yourself, but throughout your organization. So when you have, executives speaking to the press, when you have, the sales team speaking with prospects, that we're all, singing from the same songbook, so to speak.
Yeah, I love that. I actually love that example you just said about, if you service, if you used to service only SMBs or mid-market and now you're going after enterprise, but nobody's referring to you like that, then you're going to stay that way. But if you start to adjust your messaging, you stay consistent with that, people will start to pick up on that nuance and they're going to start talking about you as an enterprise business. And that's a really important point because it's probably getting overlooked a lot and people are probably just like sticking with their basic messaging. And if you don't adjust that, you're stuck.
Yeah, and I think that's why, message pull through is an important metric to keep in mind because, whatever that positioning is, if you were, say, a marketing automation provider and now you're evolving to other capabilities and you're not being tracked, you're not being positioned that way, you're losing out. So I think, keeping track of a lot of those different messages you want to be known for is a great way to track them.
That's a great point. So the next thing that I want to actually this is actually a little bit more of a workflow. So, again, for everyone that's listening, you can think of this as actually a workflow. It's a cycle of, strategic monitoring. So regardless of where you start in the cycle, this is where strategic monitoring can look like this is what strategic monitoring can look like in the customer journey, especially as it relates to PR coverage. Thinking about how you can use earned media channels to directly address customer needs. So for example, instead of thinking about what makes for a newsworthy, valuable story in general, you can add an element to your strategy that specifically addresses the customer's need and what they're saying. So say, for example, you start with monitoring. You're monitoring trends online, you're monitoring the conversation. You may find when you're doing that you find unmet customer needs. People are asking for things that you maybe don't have, or maybe you've been trying to roll out, or problems or whatever it is. And these unmet needs, now that you have this, you have a newsworthy story, but it's based on an unmet need. It's based on what the customer's telling you they want. And all PR needs to be newsworthy, obviously, but it doesn't always relate back to the customer need and to addressing the issues or the problems that could come up. And this helps with relationship nurturing. So this is going to help with fostering a stronger relationship and connect PR to sales, which we all ultimately, that's what we're all looking for is, more ROI on what we're doing. And then again, circling this back to monitoring again, is that, covering coverage and, online coverage in the online conversations that are happening about the specific topic. And I think one of the cool things about this, I don't know if we're not the only ones that have come up with a cycle like this, but one of the cool things about this is that this model, you can actually start at any point. You don't have to necessarily start just by monitoring. Maybe you're taking feedback as a communications professional. Maybe you're taking feedback directly from the sales team. People are complaining about a product, they're complaining about a service. So that is your story right there. You go and address that head on in a press release, in some kind of coverage, and then you monitor that, and then you kind of go back and see, has the sentiment changed around that? And regardless, I think keeping up with the online conversation leads to more intentional strategic coverage, which we know is extremely important with the continued drop in journalist response rates. Knowing what the audience is talking about and looking for in brand product, customer experience, customer-led messaging is what we're talking about. You can't get more customer-led than reviews, which is, G2 specialty. So Jenny, what do you think about customer-led messaging helping set up this sort of cyclical effect for brands?
Yeah, I'd say too, and you were talking about always monitoring all the different channels. I think it's so important because customer needs, as we know, and sentiment changes over time constantly. So to be
and fast.
Yes, yes. So
Fast.
I think what the customer sentiment was last month could vary drastically. So having a pulse on that is so important. And we hosted an event last month in Chicago with a panel of CMOs on the topic of customer-led growth. So this is also very top of mind for me. And one of the CMO panelists, she was talking about how her team, they read every single G2 review from customers and they analyze it by, sentiments, they segment it out by topic, and they basically are just obsessed with understanding their customers, whatever that sentiment is. And I think, using that to inform your messaging for PR and comms is, like you said, it's a great way to make that connection. So, all of your competitors, all these other companies are taking the same tactics where they have thought leadership, they're newsjacking, they're conducting surveys. But if you want your messaging to differentiate from all those other players and you want to connect with your customers, then use all of that sentiment to inform that. And so you're speaking specifically to their pain points, their needs, and you're updating that over time. So I just when I think about newsjacking too, I automatically think about cybersecurity because there's always so many data breaches, and you see all these cybersecurity companies, jumping on and they want to be an authority on that topic, which is great. But if you want to have that message resonate with customers and prospects, think about how your message can be different and connect with them.
Oh yeah, I mean, for that one in particular, I mean, it's an easy one is just to say, we found a bug ourselves. Here's how we proactively patched it for you guys. We take this seriously. We're not trying to get into news for that. We're actually trying to show our customers that we're proactive and we're actually fixing problems before you even know about it, before anybody knows about them. We took that very seriously. I think showing even that sentiment is important.
Yeah, that's a good point.
My son would love that. He's into that stuff right now. So he could be what?
The authority on that.
He's trying to. He's 14 and he's trying to. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about is that we know that word of mouth and customer reviews are imperative. And Jenny, I know in a minute you're going to share some of the data with us from G2's annual survey. What I'm fascinated about, and I love about specifically G2, we use G2 and we love G2. What I love about G2 in particular is specifically this topic of customer-centric focused conversation and hearing what the customer actually has to say, highlighting real reviews from real customers. In fact, I just read an article which I loved, that after more than a decade of pouring money into partnerships with big name influencers, marketers are increasingly betting on the less expensive deals with these amateur creators and finding ways of incorporating more relatable, authentic feeling content that's optimized for conversation, which it's the realness of it that gets me. It's just bringing something to life and saying we're gonna use real people. I even saw that the Gap just did an ad recently where they just crowdsourced the entire thing based on people's conversations on Twitter or TikTok or somewhere, which is so cool because now you're bringing just the brand loyalty, you're bringing real people into the conversation. They're not paid actors, they're not paid influencers, they're real people that are already saying that they love your brand. Side note, if anyone listening is looking to sponsor me and my dog, we have stuff going on, but that's a different conversation. So Jenny, I want to pass this over to you. Tell us a little bit more about this annual survey, why customer reviews are king, and what we need to know about this.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we were talking about, throughout this, which is trust. But just for a little bit of context, at G2, we published this annual survey, the buyer behavior report, looking at B2B software buying journey. And I think what we see with most things is B2B is starting to mirror B2C more and more. So, whether you are looking to purchase a $50 pair of shoes, a $200 hotel room, or thousands of dollars on a piece of software, you want to have confidence in that buying decision. And so a lot of these stats point to that. So think about how we purchase items where it's self-service. Before we ever engage with a salesperson in B2B, we've done our own research. We already have our decision made. And yes, we'll go to companies' websites and we'll, read all the marketing materials. But ultimately, like the examples that you were giving, Aaron, really around, we want to hear from real customers that are authentic. That's why we're seeing more software buyers are going to those review sites. And I think to even take that a step further, I trust a recommendation maybe on some pet products from you, Aaron, over a random review that I'll read online because I know you. And G2's platform does that too, where you can filter reviews by your LinkedIn connections. We're more likely to trust people that we know and that are like us. So I think what all of this kind of goes to say is that, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, is, of course, you're going to have your own content, you'll have your thought leadership, but all of those examples we've given, we know that, companies will have their marketing speak, they're drinking their own Kool-Aid, but real customers, don't necessarily have to do that. So whenever we can bring in that third-party validation into the PR process, we know that just carries a lot more credibility. So whether that's we see this with industry awards. If an association is, recognizing you as a best place to work and it's something you didn't pay for, that means a lot more than you just saying I'm the best place to work. And when it comes to customer PR, that's obviously a great opportunity to infuse customer spokespeople into that approach. That obviously can have challenges too, whether it's, legal departments needing to get involved, bandwidth, a lot of red tape sometimes. So why not kind of use what's already out there? A lot of these examples, the Chewy example of, a customer just sharing their experience, that is just so much more authentic. And that's something we see at G2. We'll hear customers that will just pull verbatim reviews and they'll use that in their display ads and in their organic social copy. They'll be talking about their rankings in our reports because they'll say, these aren't necessarily awards from G2, they're awards from our customers. So thinking about how much you can weave customer driven messaging into your efforts.
Yeah, it's so interesting also how the whole the world of reviews has evolved over time. I remember years ago, this must have been like 10, 15 years ago. I remember hearing Mitch Joel spoke about, he was talking about buying a camera on Amazon, and he said you'd go on Amazon and you look through the reviews, and he would immediately filter it by the 3 or 2 reviews. And what he was looking for was the people that are saying, I didn't need this level of like sophistication for my camera. I actually needed just something for family pictures. And he'd say, that's exactly what I need. Like, I actually trust that more than I trust these 5-star reviews that are saying it's the best thing ever. And nowadays we know that a lot of those are gamed, and the, Amazon reviews are very much, not very authentic. So, hearing that G2, specifically G2 reviews, and knowing that, there is trust behind them because everything's verified, everything has to do that, it really does kind of leave that level of confidence for brands, I guess, that are on it, to know that this isn't something that's going to be gamed and it's taken very seriously, and for the industry as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's a lot of news headlines today just around the Amazon reviews and a lot of the fraudulent situation going on there, but for sure, like, you want to have confidence and credibility. Yes, reviews are important. You want to talk to your peers, but you also want to have confidence in them. So it goes back to that trust, transparency, and authenticity, which plays such a big role.
Right. Well, that's the key, is that there's lots and lots and lots of review sites, but it's the trust and the transparency and the credibility that comes along with it, which is years of building up a brand and a reputation. And I think that, obviously G2 is a great example of that. For a very meta example of that in many ways, because you guys have yourselves a good reputation, a very strong positive reputation, but at the same time you're trusted also to give those reviews for other companies and other brands, and people are trusting G2 reviews because it is the voice of the real customer that's saying things about, saying positive or in some cases negative things about a brand, and the brand has to make decisions on what to do with it.
Yep.
So I love that. Cool. Well, thank you. Now, I just want to quickly give a little plug over here for for Propel. We actually just launched our free access to the platform. In our it's our basically this is within our mission to offer the most accessible PR tools possible. So with a Propel free account, you can really dive into Propel. Use some of our customers' favorite features to improve your PR workflows. You can set up some basic monitoring and see what's going on, and hopefully you'll give it a try. So there's going to be a link dropped in the chat. If you do want to join or sign up, it's free forever. There's no expiration on it. And also, if anyone else is interested after the webinar, my email will be on the screen. We are hosting next week a webinar, or it's more of a walkthrough, a live walkthrough of Propel, of the free platform, so you can get the most out of it. So if you do want to join, please send me an email. I'll make sure that I add you to the invite, and we can get you started on your Propel journey. And now my favorite part, the Q&A. So thank you everyone that has sent in questions. As a reminder, the Q&A is at the bottom, so feel free just to drop in any questions that you have here. But to start us off, the first question that we actually got over here is, how would you advise a brand that's normally neutral to respond to the demand of taking a stand nowadays?
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in on this one.
Please.
So I think, yeah, of course, this can be very nuanced, and especially depending the topic that you're talking about. But as the communications pros, I mean, it's really, we're not the ones that necessarily are determining what action a company is taking, but we're communicating that. So it's definitely important to be partnering with the senior leadership team, because a lot of times, if you don't want to be just joining a conversation for the sake of it, you can actually get criticized for doing that if you're not taking any action, or it doesn't actually represent what your brand, is doing and stands for. So that's why I think it's super important to be having it coming from the top, CEO level. And if it makes sense, I think internal communications is important, because your employees probably will have questions on what is our stance. But commenting externally, it's determining, does this map back to our brand values? Is this something that we can stand behind, that we're taking action on? And if so, then it may make sense too. It's very, very nuanced. And I do think monitoring plays a role in this too, because not necessarily you want to follow suit what everyone else is doing, but it is good to have a pulse on, what are our peers doing? Is this, abnormal if we comment or not, just to kind of have a sense of that. That's something that, leadership will probably ask about, if we say something, are we the only ones, or are we just jumping on the bandwagon?
Yeah, totally. And we actually hosted a webinar a month ago, or a month and a half ago, and our guest Danny Groner, he actually said a really interesting topic was he brought up, it was about newsjacking was the whole webinar, and he brought up he said, one of his strategies is to oftentimes take a contrarian view to what's typically out there. But he also he clarified that and said, don't be contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. Like, that's never a good thing. But there are definitely instances where you may find that you have a different opinion than someone else out there. That's not gonna, piss off everybody, but you're going to have a contrarian view to a specific topic. And that's not something that we should be afraid to talk about. In fact, it should be something that in some ways you embrace that, and you say, like, this is actually our stance on this. This is how we view things. And, I think that, like I said before, that example from like the Trump era, like sometimes I don't think nowadays with the, the pace of social media and the news and everything, you brands can't really stay silent. I mean, you can try, but I don't think that that's going to really work out so well. I mean, Jenny, what do you think about that? I don't think, do you think I just don't think brands can actually stay silent. They have to say something, even if it's that, fake apology, but they do need to comment.
I think again, it depends on the issue, but yeah, but you can't just, but I think it's also not lying. We have to be honest, can your brand stand behind this? We're not just saying something just to say something. So that's why it's like really important to have a process in place for whenever something happens, that, okay, who needs to weigh in? Who needs to approve this? Because again, as if you're the frontline communications person, yes, we're the message, we can help message that, but we really need input from what does our brand stand for? And so it's a much bigger discussion of like, are we commenting on these things? You can encourage, leadership to have an opinion, but it needs to be top down to determine what is that stand going forward, and everything mapping back to whether it's, do you have brand values? Are there an employee commitment? Is there a DEI message? What are those things that you've already communicated internally to your employees that once it's internal, then it can go external?
Right. And there's a follow-up question to that Michael just wrote in the chat. He says, is it better to say nothing on societal issues such as climate change, gun control, racism, if you can't back it up with action, or should you still have a statement on to show your positioning on it? I think that, I would just say that there's this is a very delicate topic, and I don't claim to be the expert on how to communicate that. But there is a delicate way of, I think, maybe addressing and just saying, like, this is not an area that we talk about. And saying that you're not going to talk about it is still a response in some ways. Or saying that, like, look, we're not saying one way or another. It's just, this is business. This is not society. Some societal issues get a little fuzzy there. I mean, Jenny, what are your thoughts on that? You might probably have more experience there than I do.
Now, those are the topics I was thinking of, because I think that's what's coming up most often, are those types of issues. And I think that's where it's really about, yes, you can say, like, okay, in general, we're not going to comment on this, or we are, but every time something happens in the news cycle, it tends to be very nuanced and specific. So yes, you can guide that, but it requires like a very careful approach every time. And I think, again, if there's no real action happening, I would be cautious to be saying something externally, because you do see a lot of brands get called out for saying, oh, you posted this on your Instagram page,
Right.
but haven't seen you do anything. Are you donating? Are you, what is your action? So just thinking through that carefully.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so the next question that we have over here are there risks to working heavily with customer reviews in a PR campaign? This seems like a very difficult channel to control messaging on. Maybe even more so than traditional news coverage. I think that one's for you.
Yeah, definitely correct in that it's something that's difficult to control. I think companies can run, review campaigns, and think about even how a lot of organizations will encourage, employees to leave reviews on Glassdoor and those types of sites. You can always encourage it. You can't control what the sentiment will come out to be, of course, and that's why it's so valued as a credible source, because it's authentic. So I think in terms of incorporating that into a PR campaign, I think there's definitely ways to do that, because you're not being asked to spotlight every single review. It can be whether it's your rankings in a report. It can be choosing some of that positive sentiment and weaving that into your messaging. So there's definitely ways to do that, and spotlighting, where you see that the value for some of that sentiment or rankings.
Yeah. Okay, cool. The next question here is, what if you notice one person sharing negative feedback on social media or in a review? Is this enough of a reason to completely change something about your business or messaging strategy?
I think if it's something that's valid, if you kind of look at that and say, oh, actually they're correct, like this is something that, this is not a strength for us, then it for sure. I think if it's something where it's, it's not something that's coming up for many customers, it's not like a major concern. I think it could be one customer who says it, but if it's true and it actually can inform your messaging to make you think twice of, okay, we should start proactively addressing this. Like I'd say, for example, if there's criticism on, say, your pricing being too high, maybe you're trying to think about, okay, we can address this by talking about, maybe we're not the most affordable solution, but that's because, on average, customers see higher, ROI within their first 6 months of using us, and we have the most comprehensive platform, or, or whatever it might be. It might actually make you think about how you can highlight other strengths.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great example. I think that it's a matter of figuring out, I think what I like about what you said is that it's figuring out like where there is validity to it and where there isn't. One bad review, maybe not, but when you start to see a series of them, at least, that's when you start. First of all, in general, I think taking all these reviews seriously is really important, and it can actually give you a lot of insight into your business and what's happening. But when you start to see a trend of these things, that's when you probably need to take a step back and say, okay, wait a second. People are obviously not happy with, like you said, my pricing model, or they're not happy with, if you have a consumer good and it's like something keeps, everything's great, but this one thing keeps snapping off or whatever, like maybe there's a problem in the production. Like that's something that you may want to go look at and start to figure out, if that's a problem that you can solve to make the customer a lot happier. And then, by the way, that's a really amazing, we heard you, we took you seriously, and we actually made a big fix. And to the people that complained, here's a, new updated product or something like that, or whatever it is, or kind of making the customers a part of that journey with you and making them so they feel like, you are listening and you're taking them seriously and you're rewarding them for it.
Yeah, I think, and if you're a brand side communications person, again, that's why I think it's so important to have that cross collaboration with other departments and teams, because, yes, that customer sentiment can inform your comms, but it also can maybe change the product. Like maybe that's something you pass along to customer service team or product team, and it can actually impact reviews and sentiment going forward.
Totally. Okay, so somebody asks, what are the main differences between reputation management and crisis management?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully your reputation isn't only crisis all the time. I think when a lot of people think about PR and comms, it's like, oh, are you dodging bullets all day and putting out fires? And that definitely can happen, but for the most part, it's maintaining proactively. Like, what is your messaging? How do you want to show up? So what can you be doing from an own content thought leadership standpoint and having an impact on your messaging, when things are just steady?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was going to say that I would say that the main difference is that reputation management is more proactive, whereas crisis management is a little bit more reactive. Where something has happened, you need to address this right now. But if you're doing reputation management correctly, this is something that there should not be a crisis happening at that point. You should be doing this because you're proactively working on making sure that your brand is discoverable, that it has the right messaging there, that there's that trust that we're building that we've been talking a lot about. And it's something that you can do over time, and it's something that doesn't have to be urgent and something you should take seriously, but it doesn't have to be like, we need to do this like yesterday. You need to do this over time and build that. And that's what building a reputation is really about. Whereas crisis management is like when everything's gone wrong and you now need to like clean up the mess.
Yeah, for sure. It's, where do you want to show up and how do you want to show up, and taking steps daily to get there.
Yeah. So here's a question we got. What's your advice on commenting on critique on Twitter to make sure you provide the right response without fueling the debate and creating more noise? That obviously could create a situation you can't control.
Yeah, I think that would, again, obviously it's situational, but and Twitter is sometimes where you see a lot of those trolls come out, and you might not want to engage with every single source. So again, that goes back to, what is the validity of this source? Is this someone who has influence and reach and they're credible, and they're saying something critical that will actually damage our reputation? If so, yes, it's worth responding, but determining the channel. I think as much as you can, like if it's a conversation, you want to try to take that offline, one-on-one. You might need to address it with a comment so people know that it's being taken care of. We take this very seriously, and we're resolving it, just so there's kind of a closed loop if that's necessary. But I would try to take more of those individual critiques one-on-one where you can.
Yeah, and actually that leads right into another question that was asked, is how much should you actually engage with these negative reviews or trolls? I mean, that's a big topic also, because the internet's littered with obviously there's real people commenting on your brand and talking about it, and those are valid. You want to listen to those, but then there's the more like the sleuthy type that are just like causing problems. So what about those? Like what is G2's take on that?
Yeah, I think when it's, you definitely see like people that are fraudulent and spammy, or, they're trying to get, gift cards for reviews and those types of things. We actually have a team dedicated to responding to some of those things. We have, automation set up. And we have community guidelines that are online that we can point back to how every review is vetted and making sure that it comes from a credible source. So if that's not happening, if your review isn't going through and it's not posting, and, we do a lot of, campaigns around either gift cards, or there's like donations to different pillar organizations we work with for reviews. So if that's not happening, there's a reason, and it's because it's not a credible review. So we can always point back to that very clearly. But I would say, like, unless there's, again, a ton of attention put on this, and they've got all these followers and they're tagging people, you don't want to spend too many cycles on that. But yeah, I think it's such an interesting topic, because it goes back to community management too. It's like
yeah, no, that's a really heavy topic also. There's just so much to unpack there. So what about this one? This is actually a question specifically about G2. Have you seen more PR agencies, and it fits a lot with the dialogue that we've been having right now, about building reputation for your brand, or for your clients in some cases. Have you seen more PR agencies working with sites like G2 besides just businesses themselves? So from the agency side, almost serving like an intermediary to help brands use channels like this to build their reputation in addition to earned media.
Yeah, I would say when I was agency side for many years, I mean, that's where G2 was really put on my radar, because a lot of my clients were they were promoting their rankings through social, through, announcements, through, a lot of different website marketing copy, which, I was working on. So I do think it's really the brands themselves are the ones that would have the profiles and the listings and be getting reviews, but the agency certainly plays a role in terms of whether they're reacting and working with their client on, okay, how can we maximize, your rankings and your reviews, because this is great content for PR. Or, talking to them potentially about, if, hey, we see you're on G2, but you're not, doing a lot with it. You're not, how do we increase your reviews? How do we, your page isn't claimed. There's definitely a role to be played to help optimize that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay, this one, we just got another question we may have covered this a little bit, but Elaine asks a question, and I think it's a really great question. She says, as a new venture trying to be noticed in a rolling sea of posts, blogs, newsletters, email, I'm eager to utilize social media, but there also seems to be a lot of venom out there directed towards even the most benign posts. How can we raise awareness of our new entity without turning over rocks and alerting the snakes? It's very, I love the sentiment there. Yeah, I love the analogies there, Elaine. They're really great. And you're right also. I think that everything you said there is also right. Like call them snakes, because like they are really they're just out to get you. These sleuths. And what about this?
Yeah, I think it's thinking about social media definitely takes time, and it's not just something you can kind of do, willy-nilly and not have a strategy in place. So if to do it well, you don't necessarily have to be on all channels at once. I mean, I would start with knowing where your audience is. So whether that's customers, prospects, partners, employees, potential employees, whoever it is that you're trying to reach, and focusing there. So I think for G2, we're on several social media platforms, but LinkedIn is where we have the most engagement and most of our followers are from a B2B standpoint. So we're really focused there. So I think I would just advise, kind of do a crawl, walk, run approach where you don't need to be on everything at once. Just think about where your customers are. And I would say generally, like, of course, you're going to have those people commenting at times, but I mean, I don't see that in terms of, especially thinking about LinkedIn as a channel. So thinking about the messages you want to promote and where you want to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that one thing that you just said there that I think is really important, it goes back to the listening and knowing where your customers are. It's that goes back to that listening and understanding where people are, what your customers are doing. And if you're talking to them on Twitter, but they're actually on LinkedIn or Instagram or wherever it is, then you're gonna have there's a little bit of a disconnect between the customer and the company. And the more we can sort of start listening and paying attention to where they are, I think more valuable this will all be. We have time for 2 more quick questions. So one of them is, what should be in a rebuilding trust action plan? What would something like that look like step by step? What does a timeline on that look like? That's a complicated question.
Yeah, I do think, I mean, there's definitely ways to have crisis plans in place. And just, I would say, scenario planning for, there will be things that might crop up, like you said, Aaron, when it's, Trump's mentioning brands and you didn't expect to be looped in, but there are a lot of things that you can scenario plan for, are we having an outage, having a data breach, different things that are likely to happen. So planning around those, and then determining, again, it will be very specific, determining what that situation is, but you can at least plan for who are the stakeholders that need to be involved, what are the layers of approval, what are the potential channels, so that way you're not doing all that homework when this happens. But I think back to building trust, it's demonstrating not just what we're saying, but being as specific as possible about those actions that you're taking. And I know you said, timeline too, which sometimes it can take time to determine what that plan is. So, obviously as quickly as possible, but if it's something where it's taking time to figure out how something is being resolved, still having some sort of communication out there around, we take this very seriously and we're addressing it, and we'll be sharing updates, promptly, just so you don't leave your audience, hanging.
Yeah, no, for sure. And one thing that you just said there that I think is, really important, and you've seen a shift, is that, you said the scenario planning is so important, and making sure that you have, different ways of communicating for different things that come up. Even nowadays, though, it may be that the scenario planning has to go even further than it was before. Like, maybe we do need to consider what's going to happen when a public figure says something negative about you, and you have to know how to respond to these things. Most businesses, maybe smaller businesses, don't need to think about that. It's not something that's really on the radar, but big businesses probably need to start thinking about that. And they need to know, like, if I'm mentioned by this guy, like, what am I going to do? We're going to be in a bit of a problem. So we need to have a rapid response, prepared and ready to go for that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you have some of those processes already set up, there's a Slack group of, who's going to talk about this. You almost have like that FAQ of like, what's the issue, who needs to be involved, who's responding. At least, all of that prep work is there.
Totally. Okay, and the last question is actually very G2 focused, so hopefully you'll have a good answer for this one. Regarding customer sentiment, what would be a good way to ask my connection at the company I represent about this? I work for an agency and don't always have this information at my fingertips.
I'm not sure
So
if
I think it's asking more of like, how do you ask your customers for for reviews? Like, how do you basically get them to speak about that a little bit more? Like, what are some of the strategies and tactics there that we can use to pull that information from our customers?
Yeah. I think like whenever we're dealing with, I think that we were seeing that rise. I'm seeing personally, even in customer marketing and advocacy roles, there's been a lot of different job postings for that, because you see the value of customer-led growth. But I think, a lot of times we're giving a menu of options to customers for, you can leave a testimonial, you can, participate in PR, you can speak at our event. So weaving this into the process of like leaving a review, obviously as something just organically as whoever's customer facing. And then there's also, we have paid customers on G2, a lot of the software brands that are on there that are they're working with our team to run review generation campaigns. And like I said, a lot of times you can determine whether they're incentivized or not. But kind of having a strategy around that. Yes, you can kind of do it organically, but to have consistent reviews, you'll want to have a campaign running.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Jenny, thank you so much for your time. It was so great having this conversation with you. I hope everybody enjoyed. If you have any questions about anything we discussed, feel free to reach out to me, Aaron at propelmypr.com. Again, feel free to give Propel Free a try. And if you do want a demo, reach out, and I'm happy to put you in touch with our sales team. They can give you a walkthrough of everything. Jenny, again, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you. A great conversation, and I learned a lot. I hope everyone else did. So stay tuned to our next webinars, and we will see you all later.
All right. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye.